are about to experience, Jackson Snyder presents. Direct from the Vero Essin Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Parallel Paths to Heaven, or Two Tickets to Paradise. At the end of the Gospel of Mark, we read, "So then, the Master, Yahshua, was taken up into heaven, and he sat down at the right hand of Elohim." Mark 16:19. Now that's a remarkable fate, to be taken up bodily into heaven, yet in the Bible it's not unique. In the book of Genesis, we find the first figure to be taken up by Elohim, that is, Enoch, or Enoch. Enoch's story is told very briefly in Genesis as part of the genealogical list of the patriarchs from Adam to Noah. The genealogy begins, "When Adam had lived 130 years, he begot a son in his likeness after his image, and he named him Seth. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived 800 years. And he begot sons and daughters. All the days that Adam lived came to 930 years. Then he died." Genesis 5, 3-5. The formula is repeated for the subsequent generations. In each case, we are told only the patriarch's name, his son's name, whether he had sons and daughters, his age when his son was born, and his age at death, until we get to Adam's great-great-great-great-grandson, Enoch. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he begot Methuselah. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch walked with Elohim 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Enoch came to 365 years. Enoch walked with Elohim, and he was no more, for Elohim took him. Genesis 5:21 and following. Enoch, it seems, doesn't die. At least his death isn't recorded. Rather, he is taken up by Elohim. The Bible doesn't tell us what this means. Enoch is the first mentioned in this enigmatic paragraph, and then never again. But outside the Bible, Enoch in his mysterious journey to heaven inspired an outpouring of literature, especially from the 4th century BC through the 1st century AD, that being called the Second Temple period. Strangely enough, the life of Enoch is described in these extra-biblical texts parallels Yahshua's own path to heaven. Both men, as we shall see, are born of a woman, but take their place in heaven as divine beings bearing the name of Elohim. The similarities between Enoch and Yahshua shed light on the Jewish roots of the New Testament account of Yahshua's life. They also allow us to trace the emergence of rabbinical Judaism and Christianity from their common source in Second Temple Judaism. Enoch's tale is recorded in 3 books, called today 1st through 3rd Enoch. These non-canonical books are included among what scholars refer to as the Old Testament pseudepigrapha, because they are falsely attributed to biblical figures like Enoch, Jacob, Adam, etc. And I'm sure there will be arguments about that, people saying that yes, Enoch did write Enoch, but you'll have to give me a break. That enigmatic passage in Genesis about Enoch supplied later interpreters with considerable grist for speculations as to its meaning, and provided the occasion for expanding on the patriarch's story. First Enoch, which is comprised of 5 main parts or books, or some scholars say 6, is clearly the most important of the Enoch writings, and the most influential in early Jewish and Christian circles. 11 fragmentary manuscripts of portions of its Aramaic original were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Greek translations were made early on. First Enoch was considered authoritative in some circles, including early Christian groups, and the New Testament Epistle of Jude quotes from it in verse 14. It eventually became a part of the Old Testament of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the only one that has it in the canon, besides the Vero Yahad. First Enoch is the oldest of the 3 Enoch books treated right here, and it's described in more detail in the next review I do, but generally, 1st Enoch contains revelations that Enoch is supposed to have received in ancient times when he walked with Elohim, and that he then transmitted to his long-living son Methuselah for the benefit of people living in the end times. These revelations deal with the nature of the cosmos, the origins of evil, and the final judgment upon it, and the ultimate salvation of the elect, the Bakarim. 1st Enoch is a compilation of material dated from the 4th century BC to the 1st century AD. As I mentioned, it was originally written in Aramaic. It survives in full only in the ancient Ethiopic language of Ge'ez, which is a precursor to modern Amharic. 2nd Enoch, which borrows heavily from 1st Enoch, also describes the life and revelations of Enoch and the events that followed his being taken into heaven. It was most likely written in Greek in the Jewish community of Alexandria, Egypt, sometime in the 1st century BC or the 1st century AD. No one is sure. But among the Christian writers, Origen is the first to have used it. 3rd Enoch is an apocalypse, a revelation attributed to an early 2nd century AD Palestinian rabbi and scholar named Ishmael. Ishmael descends to heaven, where he's met by Enoch in the guise of an angel named Metatron, who provides the rabbi with detailed descriptions of the heavenly world. Written and preserved in Hebrew, the version of 3rd Enoch that has come down to us probably dates to the 5th or 6th century AD, but it does contain much older traditions. In comparing Enoch's story to Yahshua's, we'll rely on all 3 books of Enoch. When reading Yahshua's and Enoch's story side by side, we must remember that Yahshua was a person who belongs to ancient history, one whose birth and death are part of that history, even if some parts of his story are not history in the usual sense. Enoch is a figure from Israel's mythic past, more legend than history. But both are sacred stories, and I'll treat them as such here. Enoch's story begins with his birth, as recorded in Genesis. When Yared had lived 162 years, he begot Enoch. Genesis 5:18. Later literature underscores Enoch's mortal origins. We read in 3rd Enoch 6:2 that he was one born of a woman. The very same phrase, born of a woman, was used by Paul to describe Yahshua's birth in Galatians 4:4. This phrase is used in the Bible to underscore the mortality of human beings. We can look also at Job 14:1. Paul, whose epistles predate the Gospels, never mentions the virgin birth of Yahshua. Apparently, he didn't know of that tradition. For Paul, Yahshua becomes Messiah, or Son of Elohim, only at his resurrection. For Paul wrote, Yahshua was descended from David according to the flesh, and was designated Son of Elohim in power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by his resurrection from the dead. Both Enoch's and Yahshua's careers begin with the vision of heaven. This vision gives them the divine authority needed for their work and teaching. For Yahshua, this happens at his baptism. Mark 1:10-11, when Yahshua came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens opened and the Spirit descending upon him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, my beloved. With thee I am well pleased." Enoch sees Elohim enthroned. 1 Enoch 14:18-20, and I saw a lofty throne, and its appearance was like ice, and its wheels were like the shining sun, and its guardians were cherubim, and from beneath the throne issued streams of flaming fire, and I was unable to see, and the great glory sat upon it. His raiment was like the appearance of the sun and whiter than much snow. As Enoch states at the beginning of 1 Enoch, chapter 1, verse 2, this holy vision helps him to understand, quote, everything, like some preachers I know. A special feature of Enoch's adventures as related in 1 Enoch is his close relationship with the Malachim, the angels. This special relationship is underscored in the various journeys that Enoch makes throughout the cosmos in the company of the Malachim. And that covers many chapters in the heart of the book of Enoch. He goes as far as the ends of the earth. 1 Enoch 33. Indeed, this motif may have been developed out of an interpretation of the Genesis reference to Enoch's walking with Elohim. For Elohim is a plural form that could be taken as a reference to divine beings or angels. And yes, that's something I've said all along. Gods didn't take him. Elohim did. That word is used not only for the Most High, but it's also used in the Bible for angels and even human beings in a few instances. Yahshua, too, is depicted as having a close relationship with Malachim. Following his commissioning as Messiah, Yahshua undergoes a 40-day ordeal in the desert, tempted by Satan. Mark 1:13. It's also reported that the angels ministered to him. In the Gospel of John, Yahshua tells Nathanael that he will see heaven opened and the angels of Elohim ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. John 1:51. But at the time of his arrest, Yahshua renounces angelic ministrations. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? Matthew 16:53. Once Enoch and Yahshua receive their divine commissions, they preach remarkably similar messages. Like the prophets of old, they warn their audiences of the dangers of sin. Yahshua exhorts his hearers to enter the narrow gate of righteousness that leads to life, rather than the wide gate of evil that leads to destruction. Matthew 7:13. He blesses the poor, the hungry, and those who mourn, and he pronounces woes upon the rich, the satiated, and those who laugh now. Luke 6:20. Be prepared, he urges his listeners as he prophesies the events that will lead up to the final judgment and predicts the fates of the righteous and the sinners. Matthew 24:25. Enoch tells his children to choose the way of righteousness and life and to avoid the way of evil and death. And now I say to you, my children, love righteousness and walk in it, for the paths of righteousness are worthy of acceptance, but the paths of iniquity will quickly be destroyed and vanish. Walk not in the paths of evil, nor in the paths of death. Approach them not, lest you be destroyed. 1 Enoch 94. He pronounces woes upon the rich, the powerful, the sinful, and the foolish. Woe to you fools, for you shall perish through your folly. 1 Enoch 98:9. But he blesses the righteous, and he prophesies the events that will lead to the eternal judgment. 1 Enoch 93, 1 Enoch 91. Both men offer testaments to their followers. In a lengthy speech before Yahshua's arrest in the Gospel of John, that is 14 through 16, Yahshua tells his disciples that he's going to prepare a place for them. John 14:1 through 3. And encourages them to abide in his love by loving one another. Before Enoch is taken up to heaven for the last time, he passes on his entire message to his son, Methuselah. 1 Enoch 81, 82, 91. And I might also say 2 Enoch, he's speaking to his children and giving them books. Both Enoch and Yahshua are presented as wise men or sages. Enoch knows the mysteries of the heavenly world, the cosmos and the stars, and he knows the origins of evil and violence on earth. According to Enoch, evil arrived with the descent of the rebel angels, whom he calls the Watchers, or the Urim in Aramaic. Yahshua, too, knows the secret of the kingdom of Elohim, as he reveals to his disciples in Mark 4:11. He also knows the source of evil. He reports to his followers, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Luke 10:18. Jesus knows the workings of Satan's minions on earth, the demons, and he sees exorcising them as an attack on Satan's kingdom. Mark 3:22. I should emphasize exorcise, not exercise. Enoch and Yahshua not only have similar visions of heaven, they also descend to the underworld. Enoch is taken to a deep valley with burning fire, prepared for the fallen Malachim. 1 Enoch 54. In 3rd Enoch, Enoch, here called Metatron, shows Rabbi Ishmael the place of punishment for the souls of erring angels. 3 Enoch 3:47. In the New Testament letter of 1 Peter, Yahshua is said to make a post-resurrection visit to the spirits in prison. an enigmatic passage that is traditionally interpreted as a descent into Hades, an event commonly referred to as the harrowing of hell, specifically to the fifth heaven, which is in the earth. Some scholars believe that 1 Peter may be referring specifically to the fallen angels doomed by Enoch in 1 Enoch 14. And then both Enoch and Yahshua undergo a transfiguration, which makes them as radiant as heavenly beings. Enoch reports on his experience. And Yahweh said to the archangel Michael, "Go and extract Enoch from his earthly clothing, and anoint him with my delightful oil, and put him into the clothes of my glory." And so Michael did, just as Yahweh had said to him. He anointed me, and he clothed me, and the appearance of that oil is greater than the greatest light, and its ointment is like sweet dew, and its fragrance myrrh, and it's like the rays of the glittering sun. And I looked at myself, and I had become like one of his glorious ones, and there was no observable difference. That's 2 Enoch 22, 6-10, in the J recension. Yahshua's transfiguration, related in the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, takes place on a high mountain in the company of Peter, James, and John. He was transfigured before them, and his garments became glistening, intensely white, as no fuller on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Eliah with Moshe, and they were talking to Yahshua. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." Mark 9, Matthew 17, Luke 9. I like this essay. Enoch's transfiguration takes place in heaven. Yahshua's on earth. But at the end of the Gospel of Mark, we read of Yahshua being taken to heaven, Mark 16:19. And in the book of Acts, we find a second brief description of Yahshua's bodily ascent to heaven, or to the sky. Yahshua commissions his disciples to be his witnesses, and as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. I discovered an interesting wordplay. We know what the Nephilim are. Well, would you believe that the word in Greek for cloud is Nephilim? Clouds? I almost fell off my chair when I discovered that in Revelation. Clouds of witnesses. Nephilim as witnesses. That's significant. Both Enoch and Yahshua are called Son of Man. In terminology borrowed from the book of Daniel and other places, Daniel sees in a vision a human-like figure, literally one like a Son of Man. And you should know more about the Son of Man. I have a nice lecture on that, just done recently. Look it up, because it probably means something you never even considered, especially if you sit on the pew. But Daniel says, "As I looked on in the night vision, one like a Son of Man." Human being? Came with the clouds of heaven. He reached the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. Dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him. All the peoples and nations of every language must serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship one that shall not be destroyed. Daniel 7, 13 and 14. Now this Son of Man, or human being, appears with Elohim in heaven and rules over an eternal kingdom. In Enoch, the Son of Man appears enthroned beside Elohim in a vision like that of Daniel's. That's 1 Enoch 46. To him is assigned the judgment of sinners. The Son of Man sat on the throne of his glory, and the whole judgment was given to the Son of Man, and he will make sinners vanish and be destroyed from the face of the earth. 1 Enoch 69:27. Later, Enoch is told that he is the Son of Man. You are that Son of Man who was born for righteousness, and righteousness dwells upon you, and the righteousness of the head of days will not forsake you. 1 Enoch 71:14. In Enoch, the Son of Man is also called the Chosen One, the Bakar, the elect, and the Messiah, literally the Anointed One in 1 Enoch 48:10. Thus, Enoch is presented as the expected Messiah. Now, this has no precedent in Jewish tradition, and it may be one of the reasons that the Pharisees and rabbinicals have dropped that entire book from the reading list. In the Gospels, Yahshua routinely uses the phrase, the Son of Man, to refer to himself. As Son of Man, Yahshua, like Enoch, will preside as judge at the last judgment. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Note that he is judging nations there, not individuals. Those on the Son of Man's left hand will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Note that it doesn't say they will be punished eternally, but the adjective eternal is modifying the word punishment. One fellow asked me a question one time. He went to the end of the book of Isaiah, which is probably what this is referring to. The last verse in Isaiah, I think it says the worm will ever turn and the fire will never burn out. Quite seriously asked, what kind of worms do you think those were? Of course, I answered, they're trichina worms from people eating pork. So, finally, both Enoch and Yahshua become divine rulers of heaven. In 3rd Enoch, Rabbi Ishmael asks the angel Metatron, again that's Enoch, who are you? Metatron responds that he is Enoch, son of Yared. But at the time of the flood, the Holy One, blessed be he, appointed me in the height as a prince and a ruler among the ministering angels. 3rd Enoch 4:5. Enoch Metatron reports that Elohim had dressed him in a majestic robe and had set a glorious crown on his head. And he called me the Lesser, Yod-He Vav-He. 3rd Enoch 12:4-5. Yes, that's the sacred name. The Lesser Yahweh. In this way, Enoch, son of Yared, became a second Eloha. Yahshua, too, is invested with the divine name, as the Apostle Paul records in his letter to the Philippians. Elohim has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Yahshua every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue should confess, Yahshua HaMashiach, sovereign, to the glory of Elohim, the Father. Philippians 2:6. Prophets, wise men, end-time judges, men, gods. Both Enoch and Yahshua are born of a woman, but take their place in heaven as divine beings bearing the name of Elohim. One, the lesser Yahweh, and the other, Messiah, or Yahweh. This is significant. To be able to read the life of Yahshua 300 years before he lived it, that's significant. But what exactly is significant in the similarities between Enoch and Yahshua? How did early Christian tradition about Yahshua come to look so much like early Jewish interpretations of Enoch? One possibility is that the early Christian Nazarene authors knew and borrowed from the Enoch books, at least 1st Enoch, although 2nd Enoch has some incredible similarities to the Gospel of Matthew. The New Testament epistle of Jude quotes 1 Enoch 1:9 in its verse 14, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And Messiah's harrowing of hell, mentioned by 1 Peter, is sometimes identified as reflecting the influence of 1 Enoch. Furthermore, the scene of Yahshua sitting in judgment in Matthew 25, with the righteous at his right hand and the wicked at his left, may well have been influenced by Enoch's account of the Son of Man sitting in judgment. Why, they're just about the same. But a more productive way of looking at the similarities is to see them as reflecting the common culture that produced them both. Yahshua's and Enoch's stories alike reflect a development in Jewish thinking in the Second Temple period. In this period, we find numerous Jewish accounts of divine agents and other intermediary figures who share in Elohim's governance of the world and who assist in the redemption of the elect. Larry Hurtado, a Christian origins expert in Scotland, has classified examples of divine agency speculation under 3 categories: personified divine attributes such as Sophia, or wisdom, and the Logos, word, exalted patriarchs such as Enoch and others, and principal angels such as Michael, Yahoel, and others. Such speculations occur not only in Jewish writings composed in Greek, but also in Hebrew and Aramaic. This trend in Second Temple Judaism can be referred to as binitarianism, compared with later Christian Trinitarianism. In early Christianity, several agents of Jewish binitarianism came to be associated with Yahshua. He's the Logos, the Word, John 1:1. Like Lady Wisdom, he was present at the creation, according to Colossians 1:15. The New Testament writers considered themselves fully Jewish, and they were immersed in the Jewish world of thought. It is anachronistic to speak of the religion of the first century New Testament writers as Christianity. Right. I want to read that again. It is anachronistic to speak of the religion of first century New Testament writers as Christianity. The adjective Christian was first applied by outsiders to early Jewish believers in Yahshua, according to Acts 11:26. The noun Christianity was coined by Bishop Ignatius of Antioch in the 2nd century. We know about him. So there was no such thing as Christianity until several decades after the Roman destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD. If somebody says something about the early Christians, you might just inform that person there weren't any. By the 2nd century, however, we begin to see the split that would result in Christianity on the one hand and Rabbinic Judaism on the other. Among 2nd century Christians, binitarianism expanded to Trinitarianism. The Holy Spirit came to be recognized as divine, along with Elohim the Father and Elohim the Son. By the 5th century, the Trinitarian dogma of Elohim as one essence, three persons, had become standard among Christians. The greatest flaw in Trinitarianism is in the actual Nicene Creed, that the great Elohim and the lesser Elohim are made of the same substance. That's illogical. At the same time, in Rabbinic Judaism, we see a move away from binitarianism toward strict monotheism. This is reflected in what happened to Enoch. In rabbinic texts from this period, Enoch's reputation begins to suffer. In the 5th century commentary on Genesis, known as Midrash Genesis Rabbah, the biblical phrase, "and he," that is Enoch, "was not," is interpreted not as something good, but as evidence that Enoch's name had been inscribed in the scroll of the wicked. They should have read the rest of the book. Furthermore, Elohim's taking of Enoch is dismissed as a simple euphemism for Enoch's death. More tellingly, in the Babylonian Talmud, Enoch, also called Metatron, is severely punished for posing as a second power in heaven. When a visitor to heaven, that is Elisha ben Abuya, sees Metatron on his throne, he cries out, "There are indeed two powers in heaven!" But Elohim condemns the visitor as an apostate and orders 60 lashes of fire for poor Metatron Enoch. As the biblical canon of the Hebrew Bible was finally established, Enoch was left out. His story was preserved only in Christian circles and only in the Ethiopian language with some fragments in the scrolls of Hebrew or Aramaic, can't remember. The lesser Yahweh was just a man after all. And then out of a single matrix, Second Temple Judaism, emerged two new religions, Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. Hey, Rabbinic Judaism is nothing like the Judaism before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Nothing like it. So when people think because they're hanging out with a Jewish Messianic group these days, they're following in the same footsteps as the great patriarchs, priests, psalmists, scribes, believers, they are not. And I thank you for listening. Parallel Paths to Heaven, a very, very interesting article. Makes me want to dig back into the books again. Oh, nah, gotta take a nap. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.